My name is Sarah, I'm 29, and I live and work in San Francisco. My life is straightforward. I spend my days as an office worker at a service company. Then I go home, cook a simple dinner, and read in my one-bedroom apartment near the park. My family wasn't wealthy, but they always worked hard to maintain a decent and loving home. My dad drove a city bus for over 30 years, a quiet man who'd always bring me little treats, like a pack of cookies or a notebook. My mom, a retired nurse, still makes tea every afternoon like clockwork. They never had a ton of money, but our small house outside in the suburbs was always filled with laughter and the sound of the radio playing classical music. Looking at my parents' marriage, I've always believed that an ordinary family can last if you have kindness and patience. I never dreamed of a glamorous life. I just wanted to find a man who could build a home with me, just like my parents did. Then I met Orlando. He was 30 and worked stocking shelves at a supermarket. Orlando wasn't the kind of guy who stood out. He was a little rough around the edges, dressed simply, and his mannerisms were kind of clumsy. But his eyes were gentle, his voice was genuine, and above all, he possessed unforced honesty. We met at a friend's picnic. In the middle of the noisy crowd, Orlando was quietly carrying the cooler and setting up chairs for the older folks. When I sat down, he awkwardly handed me a bottle of water, looking embarrassed, like he was afraid he was bothering me. I couldn't help but laugh at how earnest he was. After that day, we started talking more. Orlando wasn't much of a smooth talker, but he was a good listener. When I told him about my parents and our family dinners, he didn't interrupt. He just asked, "Are your folks still living around here?" I nodded and smiled. "They're out in the suburbs. I go home on the weekends a lot. My mom still cooks for the whole family." Orlando was quiet for a moment, then said, "That sounds really nice." At the time, I didn't notice the flicker in his eyes. Was it envy? Or a longing? I just saw a good man who appreciated the little things in life. We started taking walks by the bay, grabbing simple meals downtown, and talking late into the night. I gradually started picturing a future, a kitchen with the lights on, a kind man waiting for me to get home, and weekend nights curled up under a blanket watching movies. It was a simple dream, just like the life I grew up in with my parents. I never suspected that this very dream would open a completely different door, one where the darkness was beginning to creep in. Before the wedding, I took Orlando home to meet my parents one weekend evening. My mom cooked a huge spread, and my dad sat across from Orlando, carefully watching his every move. "So, what kind of work do you do?" Dad asked, his tone steady. Orlando put his chopsticks down and answered honestly, "I work at the supermarket warehouse, stocking shelves, unloading deliveries. It's not a big job, but it's stable." Dad nodded. "Stable is good. The most important thing is that you're good to your wife and kids." Mom smiled, her eyes warm. "You strike me as a gentle, honest man. I feel good about you marrying my daughter." I looked at Orlando and saw him lower his head slightly, his lips pressed together. At the time, I just thought he was shy. During the meal, Orlando talked about his family. His dad was a construction worker who drank heavily and was always yelling. His mom quietly endured it all, working extra hours to raise the kids. Orlando sighed. "My house wasn't a happy place. Maybe that's why all I want is a simple, quiet life without any fighting." Hearing that, I felt even more affection for him. I thought, a man who grew up in a home full of arguments and still maintained his gentle nature must certainly know how to value a loving home. I believed that. Shortly after, we got married. The wedding was small but warm, filled with blessings from friends and family. Orlando's mom hugged me for a long time and whispered, "I hope you can help him live a more peaceful life than his father did." After the reception, we moved into a 2-bedroom apartment downtown. In the early days, married life was exactly what I had dreamed of. Orlando would drive me to work every morning and stop by the supermarket in the afternoon to grab groceries. In the evenings, he'd help me set the table for dinner, sometimes even doing the dishes so I could rest. Those small things made me feel sure I had made the right choice. On weekends, we had a ritual of going to the farmer's market. I loved picking out tomatoes and greens, while Orlando usually stopped at the meat counter, choosing chicken or beef for cooking. He was a quiet guy, but he was strangely meticulous in the kitchen, seasoning the meat with just a little salt and pepper, then standing there, waiting for the perfect moment before putting it on the stove. I would sit by the table, watching him carefully flip each slice of meat, and I felt a deep sense of peace. In the evenings, we'd curl up watching movies and eating popcorn. I often told myself, I've found the right man. But happiness started to crack, beginning with small details. The first time was when I went out to dinner with my best friend and came home late. Orlando was sitting on the sofa, the TV on, but his gaze was cold. "Why didn't you text me?" he asked. "My phone died. I figured it was no big deal," I explained. He didn't say anything more, just got up, went into the bedroom, and closed the door harder than usual. My chest tightened, but I brushed it off, telling myself he was probably just worried. Then came the constant calls. If I stayed late at work, my phone would ring several times in a row. When I answered, Orlando's voice would start calmly. "Where are you? Are you heading home?" If I said I was still finishing up work, there would be a long pause and then he'd drop, "Okay, just come straight home when you're done." His words weren't harsh, but the silence felt like a warning. Another evening, my company had a little get-together at a bar. I excitedly told Orlando about it, and he just replied, "I don't get why you have to go. Isn't it better to just be home with me?" I forced a laugh and explained it was just a casual office thing, but the look in his eyes made me hesitate. These signs started piling up. Orlando would frown if he saw me texting friends. He didn't like me wearing short dresses to work, saying, "The office is full of men. You should dress more conservatively." When I planned to go home to my parents on the weekend, he'd say, "Stay here with me. They always have each other. I only have you." I began to clearly feel the change. Orlando was no longer just a simple, gentle man. He was gradually becoming someone who wanted to keep me inside a closed circle. Yet, I still held on to my faith. I remembered the gentle look in his eyes when we first met, and I remembered the plea from his mother. I told myself, maybe he just needs time to get used to marriage. Everything will be okay. I didn't realize that these small cracks would soon become a massive gap, pulling me into a real storm. After those sweet first months, our marriage started running into reality. Post-pandemic America was still shaky. Prices were soaring, interest rates were up, and jobs were getting cut everywhere. Even Orlando's stable supermarket job wasn't safe. One morning, Orlando came home with a dark look on his face. He opened the fridge, pulled out a can of beer, and cracked it open right at 10 a.m. I was surprised. "Why are you drinking this early?" He sank into the chair, staring off into space. "They cut my hours. I only get 3 shifts next week. My paycheck is going to be cut in half." I froze. The rent for our 2-bedroom apartment was already a burden. I tried to keep my voice calm. "It's okay. I'll take extra shifts at work. We'll figure it out." Orlando looked up, his eyes flashing with bitterness. "You think it's that easy? You sit in an air-conditioned office. You don't understand what it's like hauling boxes all day in a warehouse." His voice was laced with resentment. I sat still, feeling a thin crack widening between us. In the days that followed, I noticed Orlando drinking more. It wasn't the beer he used to buy when we first got married, but cheap cans from the discount store. That sharp, pungent smell permeated the kitchen, and Orlando became increasingly irritable. Trivial things became reasons for him to snap. One day I hadn't yet washed the shirt he planned to wear. Orlando tossed it onto the sofa, grumbling. "What do you do all day that you can't even get a simple shirt washed?" I spoke softly. "I just got back from work. I was planning to do laundry in a bit." He didn't listen, just scoffed and turned the TV volume up. Another time, I finished the dishes but forgot to turn a bowl upside down to drain. Orlando picked it up, shook the water out aggressively, and then slammed it down on the counter hard enough to make a loud clatter. "Why can't you pay attention to details? You can't even do the little things right." I bit my lip and didn't reply. I knew his wounded pride was growing, and anything I said would only add fuel to the fire. The financial pressure kept mounting. Rent was up, utilities were expensive, and my salary couldn't cover everything. One evening, I cautiously suggested, "If things are too hard, Maybe we should think about moving out to the suburbs, closer to my parents. The rent is cheaper and the air is better. Orlando slammed his beer can down on the table. His eyes were bloodshot. What are you saying? You want to go back and live near them so everyone can see I'm a failure? I shook my head, my voice trembling. No, I'm only thinking about us. He cut me off. Shut up. I flinched. It was the first time he had yelled at me. I looked at Orlando. His face was distorted with rage, completely unlike the gentle man I used to know. From that day on, Orlando became more controlling. My phone rang nonstop every time I left work. If I didn't pick up, he'd call again minutes later, his voice sharp. Where are you? Who are you with? Are you coming home yet? One evening, I enthusiastically told him about a small company party at a bar. Orlando was silent for a few seconds before saying, You work hard enough all day. Isn't it better to be home with me? Why do you need to go out with those coworkers? His voice wasn't loud, but his gaze felt like an invisible rope tightening around me. There were nights I came home late because of traffic, and Orlando would already be sitting on the sofa. The TV was on, but he wasn't watching. When I walked in, he'd just glance over, not saying a word. That silence scared me more than any scolding. The tension culminated on a weekend evening. We were discussing next month's rent. I spoke quietly. My salary can cover it, but it'll be tight. Maybe you could try finding an extra part-time job. Orlando gave a harsh, forced laugh. You think it's that easy? You sit at an office desk typing, What do you know about heavy lifting? You always think you're so smart that you can handle everything. I opened my mouth to explain, but before I could, Orlando grabbed the water glass on the table and slammed it onto the floor. The glass shattered loudly. Terrified, I backed away. He stood up, walked toward me, and suddenly swung his hand, slapping me hard across the face. Everything went quietly. The sounds around me disappeared, leaving only the frantic thump-thump of my heart in my ears. I brought my hand up to my cheek. The skin was burning hot. The man standing before me was no longer the awkward, gentle Orlando of the past, but a stranger, his eyes bloodshot, his breath thick with the smell of beer. I stumbled back against the wall, shaking all over. In that instant, I understood. The man I trusted was vanishing, giving way to the darkness he himself had once hated. The shadow of the alcoholic. Hot-tempered father he had sworn he would never become. I bit my lip until it bled, trying not to cry. But deep inside, something had just shattered. My faith in my marriage and in the man I once called my safe harbor was irrevocably broken. After that first slap, Orlando instantly panicked and grabbed hold of me, stammering, I'm sorry. I lost control. It will never happen again. The next day, he brought home a small bouquet, silently placing it on the table. He cleaned the house, did the dishes, and avoided making eye contact with me. That night, he held my hand and whispered, I just had a moment of anger. I promise I'll change. Don't leave me. I wanted to believe him. I had to believe him, because I had staked my whole life on this marriage. But the reality of life in San Francisco was harsher than I imagined. Post-pandemic rent skyrocketed, and Orlando's income dropped sharply when the supermarket cut his hours. At the same time, his mother in Oakland was hospitalized, and the medical bills, not covered by insurance, were in the thousands. When I offered to share the financial burden, Orlando snapped, You want to prove I'm incompetent? Are you going to carry everything just so you can look down on me? I was speechless. In America, money issues aren't just numbers. They cut deep into male pride. The bruises started appearing on my body. At the office, I made up stories. I slipped in the shower last night. My colleagues exchanged uneasy, knowing glances. When my mom called, asking me to come home for dinner, I fumbled. I'm too busy. Maybe next week. The truth was, Orlando had warned me. Don't let them see you like this. If you say one word, you'll regret it. Once a neighbor knocked after hearing screaming. Before I could even open my mouth, Orlando was standing right behind me, gripping my shoulder painfully. I forced a strained smile. It's nothing, just a domestic argument. When the door closed, Orlando leaned into my ear, his voice cold as steel. You let an outsider get involved one more time, and I swear I won't let it go. I lived like a ghost. I went to work during the day and was silent at night. I did everything quickly, carefully to avoid angering him, but the violence didn't need a reason. Some days, it was just because I seasoned the dinner too salty or forgot to fold the towel in the right spot, push me, yell, and shove, until that rainy night. We were arguing fiercely over the hospital bills. Orlando, completely drunk, screamed, "Even my own mother looks down on me, and now it's your turn." He punched the wall hard, then shoved me onto the tile floor. Blood trickled from the corner of my mouth. I lay motionless for a few seconds, staring up at the ceiling. A single thought flashed through my mind. If I don't leave right now, I will die. I sprang up, threw open the door, and ran out. The rain hit my face, cold and sharp, mixing with salty blood on my lips. I ran down the dark street, gasping for breath, until I stopped beneath a faintly lit sign. San Francisco Police Department. I walked in, shaking violently, and choked out, "My husband." "He hit me. I want to file a report." The police immediately took me to a private room. A female officer reassured me, "We'll handle this right away. You need to tell us everything that happened in detail." While I was giving my statement, 2 other officers went to the apartment. Orlando opened the door, face flushed, shirt wrinkled, reeking of alcohol. He threw his arms out and sneered, "What's the big deal? I haven't done anything wrong. It's just an argument. Don't all couples fight?" But his eyes were shifty, unwilling to look them straight. His hand nervously tapped the doorframe, his bicep tight, his whole body tense. When an officer pointed to a bloodstain on his sleeve, Orlando paused for a second, then bit out, "I cut my hand doing the dishes. You guys are making a mountain out of a molehill." He denied it, but the glare he shot toward the hallway, where I had just flown, was full of malice. One officer noted, "Suspicious demeanor." They didn't arrest Orlando immediately because they needed full documentation, but they were obliged to file a report and submit the case to court the next morning. That morning, with the guidance of a victim advocate, I went to the San Francisco County Court. I filed a temporary restraining order, TRO, complete with the police report and photos of my injuries. The judge signed the order that very day. "This order is valid for 21 days. We will set a hearing, and your husband has the right to present his side. But until then, he is not allowed to call you, text you, or come within 100 yards of you." I held the thin piece of paper, feeling both protected and deeply shaken, because I knew that in 21 days, I would have to face Orlando in court. When I returned to the apartment to collect my belongings, Orlando was still there. He stood in the living room, arms crossed, his eyes icy cold. "You think you can just leave like this?" His voice was choked, like a suppressed growl. I was trembling, but behind me were 2 police officers, accompanying me as per the court order. One of them said calmly, "Mr. Foster, she has the right to retrieve her personal property." "You are not to interfere," Orlando scoffed, his gaze fixed on me. "Go ahead and leave, Sarah, but remember this. No piece of paper can protect you forever." I quickly grabbed a few bags of clothes and small keepsakes. My heart was pounding, terrified that as soon as the police turned their backs, Orlando would lunge at me. His fingers drummed relentlessly on the table, his eyes never leaving my every movement. As I walked out the door, he took a step forward, but the police immediately stopped him. He stood frozen, face crimson, fists clenched, but unable to do anything more than give me a hateful look that made me shiver. I left the apartment, knowing in my heart, the restraining order only created distance. It didn't erase the nightmare. I didn't dare go to my parents' house, nor did I reach out to friends. I quickly rented a rundown studio apartment in the Mission District. The room had only a small bed, an old gas stove, and a buzzing refrigerator. That first night, I lay in the darkness, clutching the TRO, my heart jumping every time I heard a sound in the hallway. At least, for these 21 days, I had a little safety. In those first few days in the new apartment, I thought I had gotten away from Orlando. I went to work, came home, and tried to keep things business as usual. But peace in San Francisco had never felt so fragile. One afternoon, as I left the office building after work, I caught a glimpse of a familiar figure on the crowded sidewalk. Orlando. He was standing on the other side of the street, hands in his pockets, his eyes fixed on me without blinking. I froze on the spot. He didn't cross over, he just stood there watching. It was a silent reminder. I'm still here. Don't think you escaped. My phone vibrated. A text message popped up. You are my wife. No one is going to steal you from me. I started shaking and immediately took a screenshot, sending it to the police. They recorded it, opening a file for a TRO violation. An officer told me over the phone, if he approaches you again, we will arrest him immediately. But Orlando knew how to play the cat and mouse game. He didn't rush in directly. He just kept showing up fleetingly, on the street corner as I walked to work, in the reflective glass of a cafe window, or on the sidewalk when I hurried home. At night, I sat in my small studio, my heart racing at every sound in the hallway. Some nights, I'd peek through the curtain and see a tall shadow imprinted on the window pane. The darkness lingered, motionless, cold like a specter. When I flipped on the light, the shadow vanished. I called the police again. They came to check, but each time they were one step too late. Orlando wasn't stupid. He knew how to skirt the rules, how to disappear before the police arrived. I heard the officer sigh. We need to catch him in the act. Just keep documenting every text, photo, and camera footage you can get. The long nights dragged on, and I was trapped in the invisible prison of my own fear. I went to work during the day and locked the door tight at night. I didn't dare see friends, nor did I dare go home to my parents. In desperation, I called Orlando's mother. She picked up after a few rings, her voice raspy and weak. Sarah? Are you okay? I burst into tears. Mom, please tell Orlando to stop. I can't take it anymore. I'm so scared. Please, tell him to leave me alone. On the other end, I heard a heavy cough, then a sigh. I know he's wrong. I've tried to talk to him so many times. But he doesn't listen to me anymore. Sarah, I'm old, and my health is failing. My whole life I lived in fear of his father. Now it's your turn. I fell silent. Those words weren't just about helplessness. They were like a life sentence that had been passed down through 2 generations. Be careful, Sarah, she whispered. If you feel unsafe, don't wait for him to change. Run, save your own life first. The call ended, and I sank onto the floor, the phone slipping from my hand. I knew my mother-in-law cared about me, but she was powerless. And the cruelest part, she understood Orlando better than anyone. He wouldn't stop. But during the despair, a thought flashed. At least I was luckier than my mother-in-law. I didn't have children with Orlando. If I had a child, everything would be different. I would be permanently tied to this toxic marriage, forced to witness the frightened eyes of a child just like Orlando once was, living in a house full of shouting, where the violence repeated itself from one generation to the next. Thinking about that, I shivered but saw a faint ray of light. I still had a chance to escape. I still had the power to decide not to let that cycle continue. I started hiding a kitchen knife under my pillow, just for the small feeling of having something to defend myself with. But deep down, I knew, a single TRO wasn't enough to stop an obsessed man. 3 weeks after that rainy night, the San Francisco County Court opened the hearing. Orlando was facing 3 charges: domestic violence, criminal threats, and violation of a restraining order, TRO. The courtroom was packed. I sat in the front row, my hands tightly clasped. When I looked up, I was stunned to realize I was not alone. Right beside me was a woman with a fresh bruise on her cheek, barely concealed by a thin layer of makeup. In another row, someone else looked haggard, hair messy, eyes sunken as if she hadn't slept in a month. One disheveled woman clutched a plastic bag as if it contained all her remaining possessions after fleeing. And in the very back row, I saw a frail, elderly woman, one side of her face discolored, quietly whispering to her accompanying lawyer. My son. He hit me. The entire room was a mirror reflecting a harsh truth. Domestic violence spared no one, from young wives to elderly mothers. My eyes welled up, but at the same time, a surge of strength rose in me. We were no longer silent. The door opened. Orlando walked in. Wrinkled shirt, bloodshot eyes, disheveled hair. When he glanced at me, my heart momentarily seized, but this time I sat up straight, my gaze unwavering. The judge pounded the gavel. This session is now open. Defendant Orlando Foster, you are charged with domestic violence, criminal threats, and violating a restraining order. Do you have anything to say? Orlando sprang up, shouting, I just wanted to keep my family. I love my wife. You people don't understand anything. A ripple of murmuring spread through the courtroom. The judge motioned for the bailiffs to restore order. My lawyer placed a hand on my shoulder and gave a slight nod. I stood up, my voice trembling but clear. That's not love. That's fear you instilled in me. Love doesn't leave bruises. Love doesn't turn a home into a prison. The prosecutor began presenting the evidence. Photos of my bruised face were held up one by one. Hospital records detailing the injuries. The police report from the rainy night. The text message Orlando sent. You are my wife. No one is going to steal you from me. The neighbor's testimony. The screaming. The sight of me forcing a smile with a swollen face. Each piece of evidence was like a knife cutting the last thread of attachment. Orlando initially shook his head and gave a bitter laugh, but he gradually lowered his face with nothing left to defend himself. I took a deep breath, deciding to voice what I had never spoken aloud. Orlando, I once believed in you. I once thought I was lucky to have a kind man who cared about his family. I dreamed of a warm kitchen, of movie nights, and of the children who would call us parents. Tears streamed down my face, but my voice remained steady. I hid it. I made up stories to protect you. I believed your promises to change. But every promise turned into a new injury. I once loved you, but what you gave me wasn't love. It was shackles, darkness, and fear that made me lose myself. And today here, I want to end all of it. The space fell silent. A woman behind me started to cry. I heard someone whisper, She spoke for us. Orlando erupted one last time, screaming, She is my wife! You can't take her away from me. Instantly, the bailiffs restrained him firmly in his seat. The judge struck the gavel, his voice stern. Order! If Mr. Foster continues to be disruptive, the court will issue an immediate order for detention. I sat down, my chest heaving. But inside, I felt a strange sense of calm. Looking around, I saw those suffering faces watching me with gratitude. In that moment, I knew. The love that once was had died long ago. All that remained was the truth and the determination to reclaim my freedom. The entire courtroom held its breath as the judge reviewed the case files. On the bench was a thick stack of evidence, photos of injuries, police reports, threatening text messages, neighbor testimonies, and hospital records. The judge looked up, his voice decisive. After careful consideration, the court finds the defendant, Orlando Foster, guilty of 3 charges. First, domestic violence under California Penal Code 273.5. Second, criminal threats under Code 422. Third, violation of a restraining order under Code 273.6. The air felt thick. Orlando sat motionless, eyes wide, as if in disbelief. For the charge of domestic violence, you are sentenced to 3 years in California State Prison. For the charge of criminal threats, you are sentenced to 2 years, with the sentences merged for a total of 4 years of incarceration. Furthermore, you are mandated to complete a 52-week batterer's intervention program upon your release. A low murmur rose in the room. Orlando bolted upright, screaming, his voice hoarse. No, I only wanted to keep my family. I'm not a criminal. Sarah, say something! I'm your husband. You know I love you. I was shaking, but in that moment all I saw was a man who had completely collapsed. The person I once trusted, loved, and hoped would bring me happiness was now just a distorted shadow, shackled by his own rage. The judge pounded the gavel and continued. In addition to the prison sentence, the court issues a long-term restraining order for 10 years. Mr. Foster is prohibited from contacting or coming within 100 yards of Ms. Sarah Williams. The order is effective immediately. The sound of the gavel was cold and final, like the closing of a chapter. Orlando screamed and struggled, but 2 bailiffs quickly moved in, pinning his arms behind his back and cuffing him. The click of the metal echoed, cold as the chains that ended his freedom. I watched him, my heart racing. A flash of memory returned. The first picnic. Orlando's shy smile at my parents' dinner. The apology bouquet placed on the table. All of it shattered, leaving only the image of a man being dragged away in handcuffs. He turned back to look at me one last time. There was no longer anger, no more threat, just desperation and loss. But I didn't respond. I knew that love had died long ago, and the only thing left in me now was the freedom I had just reclaimed. The courtroom was silent as the door closed behind Orlando. A few women wept. Some gripped my hand tightly. In their eyes, I read relief and hope, not just for me, but for themselves. I stood up and took a deep breath. For the first time in months, I felt the weight lift from my shoulders. I had taken a step out of the darkness. My marriage had fallen apart. I won't deny that truth. For many, a divorce or a breakup is just an ending. But for me, it felt like a deep cut across the heart. I once thought I was smart for choosing a decent man. I believed in simple promises, dreamed of a small kitchen and children running around the dinner table. But all that was left was ruin. My parents were heartbroken. Dad is a quiet man, but I could see in his eyes a mix of thoughtfulness, disappointment, and sorrow. Mom held my hand, tears welling up. I wish you didn't have to go through this, Sarah. I wish you had the happiness I wanted for you. I hugged Mom, crying like a child. I knew I had worried them, had burdened their hearts, but deep in their eyes, I also saw relief. At least their daughter was alive, intact, and had escaped that invisible prison. I decided to leave San Francisco. The city was full of memories, but also full of nightmares. I didn't want to spend the rest of my life walking past streets where Orlando's shadow might be waiting. I didn't want my heart to jump every time I heard footsteps behind me. I needed a new place, a new job, a new life, where no one knew my past. On my last day at the company, I walked into the office with bloodshot eyes. This place had been my anchor for 5 years, a source of support and joy during my dark days. When I announced I was leaving, the room fell silent. Then a colleague stood up and hugged me tight. "Sarah, we know you've been through a lot. You deserve a fresh start. Go find your peace. We'll always be rooting for you." Another person held my hand. "Don't ever feel ashamed of what happened. You are stronger than you think." I smiled through my tears. I wasn't just leaving a job. I was leaving a second family, but I knew their support and love would go with me, helping me stand firm in my new location. I packed my belongings in the small studio in the Mission District. Honestly, there wasn't much. A few changes of clothes, my laptop, some books, a couple of tiny mementos. I packed it all into an old suitcase and left everything else behind. It felt like shedding an old skin, preparing to put on a new one. Before I left, I went to visit Orlando's mother. She looked much older than the first time I met her. Illness and years of enduring an alcoholic husband had drained her vitality. When she saw me, she trembled, stood up, and held me tight. "Sarah, thank you for trying. I know you did your best. Please don't blame yourself anymore." Tears sprang to my eyes. I whispered, "Mom, I'm sorry. I can't stay. I have to go to find peace for myself, and to avoid Orlando later on." She nodded, her eyes red. "Go, honey. Don't let the past hold you back. Live a good life for me too. God bless you." We hugged each other for a long time. As I stepped out and looked back, I saw her sitting on the porch, frail, her eyes following me like a final farewell. That image tugged at my heart, but I knew I couldn't turn back. That last night in the studio, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the old window looking out at the dark street. The past few months played out in my mind like a movie reel. Orlando's first smile, dinner with my parents, the evening spent cooking together, then the slaps, the rainy night escape, the click of the handcuffs in the courtroom. It all felt like yesterday. I sat there until the first sliver of light peeked through the curtain. I stood up and pulled the curtain completely aside. And for the first time in months, I saw the sunrise flooding through the window frame. The warm, golden light shone on my face, blurring the last remaining tears. I whispered, "Sunrise beyond the window. That's a sign my life is still ahead of me." That morning, I carried my suitcase to the bus station. As the doors closed, San Francisco slowly faded behind me. I didn't look back again. I knew I had closed one chapter of my life, and another door was opening. I lost a marriage. I hurt my parents, but I kept myself, and that's the most important thing.